The air should have been calm that afternoon, filled with the quiet hum of sprinklers and the faint rustle of leaves. Instead, it split open with the high-pitched crackle of a taser and the anguished scream of my wife, her body convulsing in pain as she collapsed onto the driveway. My heart stopped. She was 7 months pregnant, carrying our first child. And now she lay gasping on the hot concrete because an HOA officer, Karen, swollen with arrogance and intoxicated by her false authority, decided she didn't like where my wife had parked. I ran to her side, my knees slamming the ground, my hands shaking as I checked her breathing. "Claire, stay with me," I shouted, my voice breaking. The neighbors rushed from their porches, horrified, murmurs rising in disbelief. Karen stood above us, taser still buzzing faintly in her hand. Her lips curled into a smirk. "Rules are rules," she spat. "No exceptions. Not even for pregnant women. If she didn't want trouble, she should have followed the bylaws." Her words were ice poured straight into my veins. I wanted to scream, to lunge at her. But years on the bench had taught me restraint. Rage was boiling in me, but I held it down, focusing on my wife as she struggled to breathe. A neighbor dialed 911, shouting for an ambulance, while another cursed at Karen, calling her a monster. For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt cross her face, but it vanished quickly, replaced by that mask of smug defiance she wore like armor. When the paramedics arrived, they lifted my wife gently, securing her on a stretcher as she whimpered through clenched teeth. Her pulse is weak but steady. One of them said, "We need to get her to the hospital immediately." I followed close, but before stepping into the ambulance, I turned back to Karen. My voice was cold, measured, the same tone I used when delivering verdicts in my courtroom. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." She laughed, actually laughed, waving her taser like it was some kind of badge. "Oh, please. You think your threats scare me? I'm the HOA officer here. I enforce the rules. If your wife can't handle that, maybe she doesn't belong in this neighborhood." She didn't know. She didn't realize who she had just crossed. And as the ambulance doors shut, I knew justice would be delivered not through fists or shouts, but through the full weight of federal law. At the hospital, after tense hours, the doctors assured me the baby's heartbeat was strong. My wife would recover, though her body bore the trauma of the shock. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by the fire of resolve. This wasn't just an attack on her, it was an attack on my family, my child, and it demanded consequences. The next day, I walked into the HOA office where Karen sat behind a desk, flipping through papers like nothing had happened. She looked up, her smirk already in place. "Oh, it's you. I heard your little wife is fine. Good. Now maybe she'll learn to respect authority." My fists clenched, but I didn't raise my voice. Instead, I laid a folder on the desk: official court documents, subpoenas, charges prepared. Her smirk faltered when she saw the seal. "What is this?" she asked, her voice cracking. "My name," I said, leaning closer, "is Judge Michael Donovan, United States Federal Court. You tossed a pregnant woman, my wife. And now, Karen, you will answer to the law." Her face drained of color. She sputtered, You can't do this." It was just HOA enforcement. I was doing my job. But the walls she had built with fear and arrogance began to crumble. Behind me, 2 federal marshals stepped in, their presence undeniable. "Karen Miller," one said firmly, "you are under investigation for aggravated assault." reckless endangerment, and impersonation of law enforcement. The twist came when another figure stepped through the door, an older man in uniform, a police captain, who had heard about the incident. He glared at Karen with disgust. "We've had complaints about you before. But this, tasing a pregnant woman. You're finished." His words were the gavel before the trial even began. Neighbors packed the hearing days later, their whispers filling the courtroom. They had lived under Karen's tyranny for years, fines for flowers planted outside the approved pallet, threats for parking 2 inches offline, citations for holiday decorations. But now the veil was gone. They saw her for what she was, a bully, unrestrained, until her arrogance led her to assault someone vulnerable. And worse, that someone happened to be married to a federal judge. Karen tried to defend herself, painting herself as a misunderstood enforcer, claiming my wife had lunged at her first. But video footage from a neighbor's doorbell camera shattered her lies. The recording showed my wife standing calmly, holding her belly, asking why Karen was harassing her, and then, without provocation, Karen firing the taser into her chest. The courtroom gasped. Karen's face fell, her lies turning to ash in her mouth. The verdict was swift. Guilty on all counts. Stripped of her HOA position, fined heavily, and sentenced for her crimes. She wept as the marshal led her away, her once smug expression replaced by the hollow stare of someone who had finally faced consequences too heavy to escape. But the story didn't end in her downfall, it ended in something greater. The community, inspired by the truth revealed in court, voted to dismantle the toxic HOA board and rebuild it under new leadership with transparency and compassion. Neighbors who had once cowered under Karen's rule now stood together, united not by fear but by justice. And as for me, I held my wife's hand, her other hand resting on her belly, and whispered, "They'll grow up in a neighborhood free from people like her." The scars of that day remain, etched into memory, but they serve as a reminder that justice is not abstract, it is lived, fought for, and defended when it matters most. Karen thought a taser could make her powerful, but in truth, it only exposed her weakness. So I leave this question with you: when someone in false authority abuses their power so recklessly, is their public downfall punishment enough? Or should people like Karen face even harsher consequences for the damage they cause? Karen's sentencing was only the beginning of the unraveling. In the weeks that followed, shockwaves spread through the entire HOA community. The board, once emboldened by her theatrics, now faced questions from every direction: residents, local reporters, even state regulators who had turned their attention to the neighborhood after the courtroom spectacle. It turned out Karen's abuse wasn't isolated. Records revealed she had falsified reports, pocketed fines, and authorized citations that were never approved by the board. She had built a little empire of intimidation, and her taser was only the ugliest tool in a long line of fraud and manipulation. I sat quietly through the hearings, not as a judge, but as a husband. Claire sat beside me, her belly round with our child, her eyes steady. The doctors had warned her to avoid stress, but she insisted on being present. "If I don't face her now," she told me, "then she still wins." I admired her strength, the same strength that had carried her through the crackle of the taser and the cold floor of our driveway. She refused to be reduced to a victim. She wanted Karen to see her standing tall, still unbroken. The twist came when another woman, someone no one expected, stepped forward at one of the HOA town halls. Her name was Lydia, a soft-spoken neighbor who had always kept to herself. She carried a stack of folders, trembling in her hands, and asked to speak. The room fell silent as she revealed months of emails and memos, proof that Karen had not acted alone. There were others on the board who had looked the other way, who had signed off on her reckless decisions in exchange for favors. Lydia's voice cracked as she said, "I couldn't stay quiet after what she did to Claire. It could have been any of us." The room erupted. Neighbors shouted for resignations, for audits, for reform. For the first time, people who had once nodded silently under Karen's glare stood tall and demanded change. The board dissolved within the month. New elections were called, and this time the community voted not for the loudest voices, but for people of integrity. People who promised to protect rather than control. Karen's downfall was absolute. Once the queen of citations and fines, she now sat behind bars, her name a curse on the lips of those she had once bullied. The local paper printed her mugshot, the headline reading, "From HOA power to felony conviction." Her friends deserted her. Her reputation ruined. But more than that, her reign of fear had been erased by the truth, by the courage of those who refused to let her cruelty go unanswered. Claire gave birth 2 months later. A baby boy, strong and beautiful, his cry filling the hospital room like a promise. I held him in my arms, my wife smiling despite her exhaustion, and I thought of the night Karen tried to tear us apart. She had meant to humiliate, to control, to enforce her twisted version of authority. Instead, she had forged something strong, a community awakened, a family united, and a child born into a world where justice had triumphed. I never gloated. I never visited Karen's cell or spoke her name again in court. Justice had spoken, and that was enough. But sometimes, when I walked down the quiet streets of our neighborhood, I would see neighbors waving, children playing freely, decorations blooming in yards without fear of fines. And I knew the shadow she cast had been burned away. And on quiet evenings, when Claire rocked our son by the fire, she would sometimes touch the faint scar on her chest, left by the taser prongs. It was small, but it carried weight. She didn't hide it. She let it show. A reminder not of pain, but of survival. A reminder that we had endured, that we had turned cruelty into courage, and that even the most arrogant abuse of power can be dismantled when truth stands tall. So in the end, Karen's taser wasn't her weapon, it was her undoing. She thought she held power in her hands, but all she ever held was fear. And when fear collapsed, so did she. Now I ask you, if someone like Karen abuses false authority to harm the innocent, is justice complete when they are punished by the law? Or should communities go further to ensure such power is never given again?